at Dorchester Heights. This is the spot where cannons were placed in early March of 1776 that eventually compelled the British to evacuate the city of Boston. Evacuation Day, it's a holiday only celebrated in Boston and Suffolk County. Henry Knox, age 25, heavy-set man, over 300 pounds, and his brother William, age 19. Knox was a good friend of General George Washington's, and he had an idea. What if they went up to Fort Ticonderoga, 300 miles away, took the cannon there, and bring them back to Boston, place them here on the Heights, because they had just lost Bunker Hill in June of 1775, but the British seemed to be lax and didn't care about this position, getting the high ground. When Henry Knox first proposed this idea, this operation, he was laughed at. General Artemus Ward giggled, and General Washington, who was a good friend of Knox and had full belief in what he was going to do, said, well, you're going to help him, Ward, which he did. And Knox set out. His plan was to go to Fort Ticonderoga, which was captured in May of 1775 by Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys, and also Benedict Arnold. And Arnold never got the credit for that, and that's one of the reasons why he became a turncoat. So in November of 1775, Knox leaves for Fort Ticonderoga with his brother Billy. They get boats called bateaus, scows, and petty augers. They're going to load the cannon from Fort Ticonderoga, which is at the base of Lake Champlain. Then they have to use portage overland and get it into Lake George, travel 33 miles south on Lake George. Now, there were three types of cannon that were taken by Knox from Fort Ticonderoga: cannons, howitzers, and mortars. Mortars have more of a straight-up trajectory, short range, medium-range howitzers, and of course these long-range cannons. They had an 18-pounder, two 18-pounders, and they had a 24-pounder, which was the prize of the drag, 300 miles from Fort Ticonderoga on sleds taken by oxen. So they loaded it up, and it took them several days, almost the entire month of December, for William to get all the cannons out of Fort Ticonderoga into small boats, row them down, in some cases sail them down. They had one sailboat. Then offload them. William Knox will stay behind. Bill Knox, 19 years old. Henry's going to go out ahead now and get provisions. He's going to get a bivouac where they're going to sleep, food, oxen, sleds, rope, pulley, and actually he doesn't know the trail. He's got to find the trail that he's going to drag these thousands of tons of cannon 300 miles. And he made a lot of suppositions. He needed Lake George to be unfrozen. By the time he got across it, he needed both the Mohawk and the Hudson River to be frozen. It was a treacherous route. They had to cross the Mohawk River and the Hudson River 4 different times. He's now securing, going in General Schuyler, hey, which way should we go? Which is the best way to ford the Hudson, the Mohawk? They had to, I think it was travel down the east side of the Hudson, cross the Hudson and the Mohawk, travel down the west side of the Hudson, and cross back across the Hudson to the east. You have to go. So they're going to down the Hudson River, and they're heading to Albany. It's Christmas Eve, and there's no snow. So how are they going to drag them from sled now? And Henry Knox gets his wish. Over 2 feet of fresh snow falls. It's so heavy that he has to abandon his horse and walk in the miles in waist-deep snow for 4 miles. And then finally, he secured provisions, made deals with the local burghers and the leaders of the villages. He had to avoid, number one, going into a river that isn't frozen. Number two is loyalists in the area getting word back to Boston that this operation is underway because it's top secret. So they get the 2 feet of snow. Eventually they cross the Hudson and they lose a cannon of the Mohawk. It's pulled out. They get to Albany, and all the villagers of the Albany, young men, women, and children, help pull the cannon out of the Mohawk River. Here, Albany. And now they cross into Massachusetts, and Henry Knox was keeping diaries, and he went dark at this point. He was a writer who wrote volumes and volumes on the Revolutionary War. He was well versed in artillery, had read about artillery, and his diaries, as soon as they get into Monterey, they stop. And he says, we could almost see heaven. They also had to cross the Berkshire Mountains in the dead of winter with ice, very, very dangerous. And then his intention was to go on the smoother roads to Boston by horse and wagon. A lot of assumptions made there. So they go up the Berkshires, and the Teamsters from New York were promised that once they get to Westfield, they would change over from New York to Massachusetts Teamsters. Again, there's pairs of oxen, 43 pair of oxen, and men pulling these cannons on sleds through the snow. The train is a mile long. They were probably real quiet. So they get to the Berkshires, and now they're at the top, and there's icy ledges, and some of the men are going to quit on Knox. And Knox pleads with them for 3 hours, probably something to the effect of about, for your families, for liberty, pull. This could save the revolution, get the British out of Boston once and for all. Who knows? Either way, he won them over, and the most dangerous part of coming down the Berkshires, of course, was coming down. But they used weights and pulleys and ropes. The Marbleheaders, John Glover, he was the one that helped row Washington across the Delaware, surprise attack. Glover had taught him about using block and tackle and pulley. They get down there, they get into Westfield, and there's a huge celebration. A lot of cider, a lot of whiskey, and the people are fascinated with all these men and all these animals and these cannons. Again, word never gets back to Boston. And then they had to switch over from oxen and sleds to horses and wagons when they got to Westfield. They head down eventually modern day Route 90, Route 9, Route 20, and they pass through Framingham, and that's where John Adams sees them with a smile on his face. Washington knows they're here, all the cannons. The biggest was a prize 24-pounder. They had a couple of 18-pounders, long-range cannons. They had howitzers and mortars that they were going to place atop Dorchester Heights. So Knox did his job. He got the cannons to Dorchester. About March 2nd, March 3rd, 1,200 workers, including 800 soldiers, using 360 oxen carts with a muffling, started to bring branches, trees, and the cannons to occupy Dorchester Heights. Bringing up brush, they were going to build a redoubt, an embrasure here with sticks from the forest that they found. Essentially, Henry Knox dragged 55 cannons from Fort Ticonderoga, placed them atop here in silence and secrecy, but they didn't want to give themselves away to the British, so they had a feint, a decoy fire from Cambridge to make the British think that they were going to attack from the back bay, when in actuality they wanted to distract the British so they could build the forts here and bring the cannon up. And General John Thomas marched his men across Dorchester Neck into the heights, and that's where they built the embrasures, the redoubts here. But it was a clandestine operation, very secret. Everybody, every single person kept it to themselves, and the British never got back to them. And they successfully built a fort here with cannon that they had taken from over 300 miles away from an abandoned fort. And then they actually opened fire on British positions, and the British fired back from their ships. So essentially, this is the point that they'd, out over my shoulder, they'd be looking at in Boston. And again, these long-range cannons like this puppy here could certainly reach the ships that were anchored in Boston Harbor. In fact, 4 men were killed in this very zone, one of the first nights of the engagement. There was actually a short battle of Dorchester Heights, a battle of South Boston. So it's not that the British saw the guns and just said, oh, we're going to get out of here. No. So by morning, it gets back to General Howe of the British that, wow, they put cannon up on the hill. And he says, F that, we're going to take them down. And one of his confidants says, General, we can't afford another victory like Bunker Hill, where they had over 1,000 casualties. So then they load them up, the British, Howe loads them up in the longboats. They're going to come across the harbor and attack the redoubt and take down these cannons. Well, a nor'easter comes up, what the British described as a hurricane. And the men on the longboats, they couldn't launch the operation. They were in the longboats overnight. They got seasick. So Howe said, we're going to leave Boston. If you fire on us, we'll burn the city to the ground. But by March 17, 1776, General Howe with the British Army and his 4,000 troops decided to split from Boston. A bunch of rabble, not worth the cost and worth defending. They were surrounded on the peninsula of Boston, known as the Shawmut Peninsula. So they basically sailed out of Boston Harbor. Meanwhile, they started burning homes in South Boston, burning homes in Boston. They had looted all the stores, including Henry Knox's bookstore. They had taken that in April 1775. And there was a smallpox outbreak during that time as well. So when Washington came in with 1,500 of his own troops, they were all immune to smallpox. But the British evacuated Boston on March 17, 1776. Today, as of 1901, is commemorated in Boston and Suffolk County as Evacuation Day. A lot of assumptions made, but you know something? It worked.